Arthur Williams II, the greatest counterfeiter in America, forged tens of millions of dollars and baffled the FBI for years. Imagine, this man was arrested carrying a bag containing $60,000 in counterfeit bills, yet they couldn't prosecute him, and he slipped through their fingers with ease. How did he do it? And how did he end up in prison? It was his 15-year-old son who exposed him. Imagine, the man the FBI couldn't catch was exposed by his teenage son in the most ridiculous way. An incredible story filled with family drama, police investigations, forgery, theft, and unbelievable events. The story is packed, guys, and you shouldn't miss it, so get yourselves ready for a light or heavy dose, depending on what you like. And if you're not subscribed, this time, the story is about a bank robbery that took place in Japan. It was a crazy robbery, forget about armed robberies and underground heists. This time, the operation is even crazier. So, if you want to hear this story, all you have to do is be there tomorrow in a room. You can probably access this room through the link below. Register for the room and be there on time tomorrow, Saturday, at 8 p.m. Mecca time. I want you to set an alarm for this time and don't forget, okay? Believe me, you'll love the story I've prepared for you. The hero of our story today is a man named Arthur Williams II. We'll call him Arthur II for short because this Arthur will have a son and name him Arthur III. A family of wonders, God willing. Anyway, this Arthur II is considered the greatest Arthur, a counterfeiter who had traveled to America, was the most skilled at creating exact copies of the dollar. He entered the world of crime at a young age. His first crime was breaking a parking meter to buy groceries and help his mother. One day, he returned home and opened the refrigerator to find it empty. He felt immense anger, wondering why they were poor and why their situation was so dire. He stormed out of the house, frustrated and agitated. Walking down the street, he saw a parking meter and, to vent his anger, he struck it with his hand. He heard the coins rattling inside. He thought to himself, if I can open this meter somehow, I can get the money inside. He toyed with the meter, trying to open it, and finally managed to insert a small piece of metal into the lock. He searched and tried until he finally unlocked it. When he did, he took out all the coins inside and went to the supermarket to buy groceries. When his mother returned home, she was surprised and asked him, "Where did you get all this, my son?" He said, "By God, Mother, I broke the parking meter and took the money inside." She replied, "My son, I don't want you to steal money so we can buy things for the house. God will provide for us." He said, "Mother, God truly did provide for us. He taught me how to break the meter's lock." The main reason for their dire financial situation was that Arthur's father abandoned them in 1983 when Arthur was only 11 years old. This was one of the biggest shocks he experienced in his life. After he abandoned them, they couldn't pay the rent and were forced to leave their home. They lived for a while in a homeless shelter, and literally, survival was their only option. Eventually, they were moved to one of the government-subsidized housing projects called public housing. These are usually substandard places designated for people with low or limited incomes, rented to them by the government at low prices. This was a dark period in Arthur's life, and every time he saw his mother, his face etched with grief. The weariness and despair of life only intensified his anger towards his father, who had abandoned them and left them to live in such conditions. These public housing projects they lived in were, by their very nature, areas teeming with gangs and illegal activities. Arthur grew up in this environment and began associating with some bad boys. He made friends with them, and they formed a small gang, committing various thefts. Sometimes they robbed shops, sometimes cars, they broke parking meters, and so on. In 1987, when Arthur was 15, he met an older man named Da Vinci. Da Vinci was one of his mother's friends, or perhaps even her secret lover. Whatever the reason, he was close to them. One day, the police arrested Arthur after he tried to steal a car. Da Vinci went to the station, secured his release on bail, and signed the paperwork. After they left the station, as they walked down the street, Arthur said, "Look, my son, if you want to be a criminal and a thief, you have to use the methods. The smartest thing to do is stay away from these thefts. Breaking meters, stealing cars, and robbing shops won't do you any good. You need something better." So, ask Arthur what's better. Da Vinci said, "Come with me, I'll show you." He took Da Vinci to an old building, a warehouse. They entered the building, then took an old elevator and went down to the basement. In the basement, there was a place that looked like a workshop with machines, paper, ink, and many other things. Arthur entered, looking right and left, and he was surprised. The first thing he noticed was the distinctive smell of ink. What was this place? Da Vinci said, "Come, I'll show him." Then he went towards the machines and tools and started working. He was taking out the paper, adding the ink, setting up the molds, and operating the machines. Arthur quickly understood what was happening. Da Vinci was printing counterfeit money. Arthur was immediately mesmerized by what he saw. He was watching money, this paper that the whole world fights over, being made right in front of him. From then on, Da Vinci took him to the workshop every day. He taught him and showed him the printing process, explaining how to mix colors, how to make the molds, and how to number each sheet with a different serial number. He was very impressed with the work. He loved the atmosphere and the artistic aspect of the counterfeiting process. Moreover, Da Vinci became like a father figure to Arthur, who saw him as a role model. Of course, he was also happy with the money he received. Every time they printed a batch, Da Vinci paid him. It was like a business, and this continued for about a year. Then, suddenly, Da Vinci disappeared. He stopped coming to their house and stopped communicating with them. When Arthur went to the workshop, the warehouse was locked from the outside, and he couldn't enter without a key. The place was completely sealed off. Just like that, Da Vinci disappeared from his life, and he felt as if his father had abandoned him for the second time. It was a very painful feeling for Arthur. Maybe he hadn't really abandoned them, maybe something had happened to him, especially since Arthur knew that Da Vinci was selling this counterfeit money. For the gang, maybe he got into trouble and was kidnapped or killed, God knows. The important thing is that he disappeared. So, Arthur decided to return to his old friends or gang and went back to stealing. He went back to robbing shops, cars, and things like that. The second mistake Arthur made at that time was getting into an illicit relationship with a girl, and as a result, he had a son when he was only 17 years old. He named his son Arthur III and was determined to take care of him and be present in his life, not abandoning him like his own father had. So, to support his son and his son's mother, he needed to work harder. His friends devised a new way to make money. This time, they decided to steal from drug dealers. They would disguise themselves as police officers and drive a car that looked like a police car. Because they were from the neighborhood, they knew the drug dealers and what they looked like. Before carrying out their operation, they would know, for example, if someone had hashish, and then they would ambush and raid him and take it. The hashish and money he had with him, supposedly because they were police, was nothing out of the ordinary. Everyone knew that many police officers were corrupt and would take the confiscated money and drugs for themselves. So what Arthur and his friends were doing wasn't unusual. They kept repeating this operation for a while, but then they faced a dangerous situation. One of the drug dealers they tried to rob had his gang members nearby. Instead of surrendering, he called his friends, who pulled out their weapons and started shooting at Arthur and his gang. Arthur and his gang immediately ran in terror, hearing bullets whizzing past them. Suddenly, a bullet hit Arthur in the leg, and he fell to the ground. He gradually lost consciousness from the blood loss and thought that these were his final moments, that they were going to finish him off. But then he woke up in a hospital bed and realized that the gang hadn't finished him off. They left him bleeding and unconscious until the ambulance arrived. They saved him. This incident was very frightening for him. He miraculously survived. After that, we decided it was time for him to leave Chicago. He decided to go to Texas, even though he knew this meant he would leave his son and mother-in-law behind, abandoning them just like his father had done to him. But Arthur was scared and didn't feel safe in Chicago, so he left and went to Texas in 19. There, Arthur tried to live an honest life and worked some difficult jobs with low pay, but he persevered, trying to change himself. He wanted to leave his criminal past behind. During this time, he met a girl and fell in love with her, and she reciprocated his feelings. As their relationship grew stronger over time, Arthur proposed. He felt so safe with her that he told her about his past and what he used to do, the thefts, the forgeries, everything. Contrary to what he expected, instead of saying, "What is this? You're a criminal and a counterfeiter," she said, "Wow, you're my Prince Charming." His criminal past only made her admire him more, and on the contrary, she kept trying to convince him to return to counterfeiting. She told him, "If you were truly this skilled when you worked, and if you were like Da Vinci, then go back to counterfeiting. We'll be rich, and our lives will be better." When he heard this from her, he was convinced and excited, especially since his wife was supporting him. In fact, she seemed even more enthusiastic than he was. So, Arthur began planning his counterfeiting project. He bought printing equipment and started to reminisce about the old days of Da Vinci and the things he had learned from him during the year he spent with him. He began experimenting and printing, improving each time. Of course, he wouldn't accept anything less than a perfect result. Little by little, Arthur began producing small quantities of counterfeit money because the hardest part was spending it. Even though the counterfeit money was difficult to distinguish from the real thing, spending it was always risky. So, Arthur spent it cautiously. This was one of the things he had learned from Da Vinci, and he intended to increase the quantity over time. But the most important thing was, at first, he was sure everything was fine and that no one could distinguish the counterfeit money from the real thing. But in 1996, an unpleasant surprise awaited Arthur. What happened that year? The U.S. government issued a new version of the $100 bill. This version had many security features that made it much more complex than the previous version and far more difficult to counterfeit. For example, there was a watermark that appeared when held up to the light, and the ink used in the paper changed when turned over or viewed from a different angle. There was also a security thread that turned pink when placed under ultraviolet light. Of course, it had the seal of the Federal Reserve, and there were small writings called microprinting printed in certain places on the bill. So, counterfeiting this currency was very difficult and complex. In fact, the U.S. government designed the new version to resist counterfeiting because counterfeiting was widespread in the 90s. This new version was supposed to baffle everyone, but when Arthur saw it, he didn't despair. On the contrary, he was excited. He saw it as a challenge. It was true that this was a completely new level and different from what he had learned from Da Vinci, but the time had come for him to master the craft and forge his own path. Tools that didn't even exist in Da Vinci's time had emerged because the use of computers and design programs, especially Photoshop, which was considered a revolutionary new technology, had begun to spread. Most likely, Arthur was one of the first people to use these digital technologies to counterfeit money. But before designing, and before anything else, the first thing they needed to do was get the printing paper itself right. They had to get paper identical to that used by the Federal Reserve because the cashier taking the money could easily check it. He could take a special type of pen and scribble on it. The line should appear yellow, but on regular paper, this pen would leave a brown line. This was one of the new security features achieved through chemical materials. The paper used wasn't exactly readily available to the public. It was actually a mixture of cotton, linen, animal glue, and various chemicals. Where else could one find something like that? Arthur ordered paper from all over the world. They literally tried every type of paper imaginable, searching for something at least close to the quality of a $100 bill. They spent a long time ordering and trying different kinds, but every attempt failed. The writing always came out brown. It got to the point where Arthur was starting to despair, and signs of frustration were showing on his face. His wife yelled at him, "No! How can you despair? I won't allow it." She grabbed the largest book nearby, which happened to be a phone book, and held it up to Arthur as if threatening him. Then she threw it on the table. Just being silly. She took a pen and scribbled on the book. To everyone's surprise, the writing came out yellow. They looked at each other in shock, then started shouting with joy and excitement. So they went and tracked down the printing company. The phone number she contacted, claiming to be a teacher, said she had a project with her students and needed this type of paper. The company replied, yes, of course, you can take as much as you want, because they didn't know they intended to use this paper to print money. When the paper arrived, Arthur was surprised by its perfection. When they placed two sheets on top of each other, the thickness was very close to that of banknotes. Arthur told them they could put the watermark and security strip between the two sheets. So, they solved the paper problem, the watermark problem, and the security strip problem. The only major remaining problem was the ink, which changed color. Arthur was walking one day when he saw a car painted with a mixed purple and green paint. Every time he walked or moved, the color changed, just like what happens with a $100 bill. So, they contacted this company that makes car paint, and in the end, they found out it was the same company that makes the ink for the government. They use it on money, meaning, wow, they got to the source, so they prepared everything, the paper, the ink, the design, everything was there except for the printing. But even the printing required work. Arthur knew that all banknotes were closer to a creamy green color, and a color like that couldn't be achieved with regular printers like laser printers. This needed to be printed using a press, and the machine had to be pressed multiple times to get that same color. So, first, they applied the ink, the watermark, and the security strip. Then they pressed the paper for the first time, followed by the image in the middle and the border, and pressed it a second time. Finally, they added the seal, the serial number, and the rest of the details, and pressed it a third time. They even had a program designed to automatically change the serial number of each banknote. So, as you can see, Arthur truly deserves his title, the greatest money counterfeiter America has ever seen, and perhaps the greatest money counterfeiter the world has ever seen. When Arthur Rinaldo, who had meticulously planned the operation, finally achieved an incredible result, the banknote was identical. The real $100 bill was so amazing, and she decided to try it herself. She went into a small supermarket and ordered something small for $10. She gave the cashier the $100 bill so he could give her change, which was $90. The cashier, of course, first took a pen and drew a line on the bill. The line turned yellow, so he held the bill up to the light and saw the watermark. He then decided it was real, put it in the till, and gave her $90 in change. Knight left the supermarket overjoyed. The moment Arthur saw her, he knew this money would take them to another world. From then on, they started printing large quantities of counterfeit money. They might have been printing around $50,000 a month, but of course, they were careful when spending it. Yes, their money was professionally counterfeit, but they had to take precautions. For the next year and a half, they moved from place to place, printing their money, spending it in a specific area, and then immediately leaving for another. When I say spending their money, I don't mean they spent it all, I mean they laundered it. They would take, say, $100 and buy something for $5 or $10, and get back $90 in real, clean cash. This is how they continued to build their wealth. For these young people, around 23 years old, life was like a dream. They had the freedom to do whatever they wanted, and they kept expanding their business and printing more and more money. Sometimes they would print $30,000 in a single day, and it got to the point where they didn't know what to buy with the money. They had everything they wanted, so they would buy children's clothes, diapers, toys, and things like that. Then they would go to charities and donate. Now they were receiving the happiness of helping those in need passed with each passing year, and then the year 2000 arrived. Finally, Arthur decided to return to his hometown, Chicago. Of course, this brought us all the way back. Arthur had supported his son and mother financially for years, but years had passed since he last saw his son, who was now 10 years old. When the little boy sought his long-absent father, he suddenly returned to his life. Arthur started taking him out, buying him toys and things. The boy began to bond with his father, and their relationship began to return to normal and strengthen. He reconnected with his old gang and friends, the ones he used to steal with, and immediately told them about his new business, printing counterfeit money. When he showed them the money, his friends were shocked. They couldn't tell the difference between it and real money. Of course, Arthur wasn't telling his friends about it just to start a conversation. He was telling them so they would join him in the business and help him, because Arthur was printing far more than he could spend. Her friends, if they had connections in big restaurants, nightclubs, and casinos, could distribute the counterfeit money to these places. And indeed, this money was everywhere. No one suspected it, not even the FBI. It was professionally designed money, considered the best counterfeit dollar on the market. A large quantity of Arthur's money was circulating, but the amount Arthur could actually print was much larger. It was much easier to deal with gangs, he could take $100,000 of the counterfeit money and sell it to a gang for $30,000 than try to spend and launder it himself. So he started selling the money to gangs, and they would clean and launder it. But when Arthur started dealing with gangs, he knew he had entered a dangerous world and that he had to be careful and vigilant at all times. He was dealing with people who could end his life in an instant if they wanted him to: Russian gangs, the Italian mafia, and other dangerous people. In the criminal underworld, Arthur was wary of everything and constantly monitored his surroundings. He would check every place he went or every room he entered with devices to ensure there were no hidden listening devices or microphones. For every meeting he attended, he would bring an X-ray machine and ask anyone he met for permission to search them. He wasn't prepared to take any risk, even if one of them was wearing a listening device under their clothes. Arthur continued in this way until 2002. One day, a Russian gang he was dealing with invited him to a party. This party, of course, involved all sorts of contraband, including hashish and other drugs. Arthur was carrying counterfeit money, which he was supposed to give to the Russian gang. The party was held in a disco at a hotel, so there were many people there who weren't members of the gang, in addition to the hotel staff. Many people noticed the hashish, drugs, and other prohibited items. The gang had made reservations. There were several rooms in the hotel. One of these rooms was reserved for Arthur. Arthur went up to his room to rest a bit, and of course, he had with him the bag of counterfeit money, which contained about $60,000. He also had hashish as a gift from his Russian friends. After about half an hour, Arthur suddenly heard a knock on the door. A loud voice from behind the door said, "Police! Open the door!" It seemed that someone who had been at the disco or one of the employees had informed the police. He opened the door, and immediately the police stormed into the room, weapons in hand. They started asking him where the drugs were. He told them he didn't have any drugs, but there was some hashish on the table next to the bed. The police began searching the room and, of course, found the bag containing the $60,000. Arthur's heart started beating fast. Unfortunately for him, one of the policemen was experienced with money. Initially, the police thought this money was from drugs. When the policeman took out the money and he counted the money while holding the papers and said, "I feel like there's something wrong with the money." That's when Arthur knew he was in trouble. He was arrested, and they confiscated the hashish and the money. Arthur thought it was all over. The police would quickly discover that the money was counterfeit. This was, of course, a federal crime, much more serious than drug possession. When the investigation began, Arthur hired a lawyer. The lawyer started reading the police report to Arthur, which stated that during his arrest, the room door was open and that the police saw the hashish on the table next to the bed. This was the reason they broke into the room and searched it. Arthur told his lawyer, "No, that's impossible. They couldn't have seen the hashish in the long hallway, and it's impossible for someone standing at the door to see the table next to the bed unless they were Superman and could see through the walls. Their field of vision couldn't have seen what was inside the room." The lawyer asked the judge to dismiss the case because it was based on an illegal search from the outset, since the police entering the hotel room required a search warrant or a convincing reason, and the reason they mentioned in the report, that they saw hashish on the table, so they entered the room, was proven to be a lie and impossible. The judge ruled the case invalid from the outset because the search was illegal. Imagine, Arthur got away so easily, even though they caught him with 60,000 counterfeit dollars. But of course, after his release, his fear intensified. He became extremely anxious and searched everyone he met to avoid being touched. Now he knew the FBI's eyes would be on him. He escaped this particular case, but they knew he was counterfeiting money, or at least that he possessed counterfeit money, so he was definitely under surveillance. At this point, Arthur stopped all his printing activities and his dealings with gangs and others. Despite this, he remained constantly terrified of everything and felt he needed something new to change his life. So he began trying to track down his father, the one who had abandoned him and his mother when he was 11 years old. And indeed, after searching, he was able to find him. A man named Arthur wrote a letter to his father, who lived far away in Alaska. Arthur's father replied by phone, and they talked for about an hour. Afterward, they decided to meet. Arthur booked a flight to Alaska, and the moment he saw his father, he was overjoyed. It was his father, after all. At the same time, Arthur felt a strange mix of anger and emotions. He was burning with resentment at why he and his mother had abandoned them, why they had been left to suffer alone. During the following days, Arthur and his father continued to talk and share their life stories. His father would always apologize, explaining that during the time he and his mother had left, he was going through a dark period and suffering from many psychological crises. These conversations and this back and forth brought them closer, and Arthur began to feel what it meant to have a father. Enthusiasm for his father fueled his desire to tell him about the counterfeit money he had been printing. His father listened attentively, clearly very interested. And imagine, not even a day had passed before Arthur was surprised to find his father approaching him, saying, "My dear father, my situation is a bit difficult, and work has been slow lately. So, if you could you print some money for me to improve my situation?" Arthur was surprised and said, "Didn't you hear me when I was telling you about? The story goes that I was arrested and almost imprisoned," so he told his father, "But my son, you have a talent, and that's a blessing. One shouldn't reject a blessing. Your father is in need, and believe me, I will help you. We're here in a remote place that no one knows about." Arthur started thinking about it. He was scared, but at the same time, he wanted to make his father proud. So, Arthur decided to go back to printing again for his father's sake, the father who had abandoned him and left them to suffer poverty and homelessness. Life is truly strange. Anyway, Arthur had hidden some paper and printing presses in a warehouse in Chicago, so he asked his friends to ship the paper and machines to Alaska. The items arrived, and Arthur and his father started working together, setting up the printing workshop and preparing it for the operation. This experience brought them closer together. Arthur was happy to be showing his father his craft. He was proud of his work and the level he had reached, and the fact that he and his father were working together filled him with immense happiness. This meant that not all the necessary tools were available, so the results this time weren't up to par. They weren't terrible, but the copies were of poor quality compared to the ones Arthur had printed before. Arthur had told his father that this had to remain a secret between them and that they needed to test the printed money first, not spend it right away. His father, although he understood him completely, did everything Arthur asked. The first thing he did was tell his new wife, Ines, after Arthur's mother, and give her $3,000 to spend and wash. Ines went and gave some of the money to a couple of their neighbors she knew, so they could wash it too. The stupid thing was that when they saw the money in their hands and realized it looked like real money, they said, "Why wash it? We can't tell it's fake." So, all the fools started spending the money without a second thought. They weren't even trying to exchange it for real money, they just spent it like that. Without a doubt, the father, his wife, and the neighbors were all a bunch of fools. Arthur, even though he didn't know what was going on, sensed that his father was acting strangely. When he asked him where the money he had went, his father would avoid the question and give him evasive answers. When Arthur saw this, he knew something was wrong. He immediately said, "Peace be upon you," and decided to leave Alaska. He told his father, "Dad, I feel like what I'm doing with you is wrong, and I'm not comfortable with us printing this money. So, I'm leaving." His father replied, "Okay, son, may God grant you success. Whatever makes you happy. I'll be here anytime if you want to contact me." Of course, the father already knew how to print the money, he had learned it and intended to continue printing it himself. Anyway, Arthur left Alaska, and his departure came at the right time because the couple Anise had given the money to the neighbors were spending freely. When they went to a store, made some purchases, and tried to pay with the money. The cashier, upon seeing the money, knew it was counterfeit and called the police. They were arrested, and the police recruited the couple as informants to catch the real fish, the one printing the counterfeit bills. Ultimately, they arrested Arthur's father and his wife, Anise, and obtained a recorded phone call from their neighbors in which they confessed to the entire counterfeiting scheme. Imagine what happened next. When the investigation began, Anise spilled the beans and told them everything, implicating Arthur and revealing his involvement. Arthur, who had returned to his wife, Natalie, was surprised when special forces stormed his house. Because Arthur was cautious, he hadn't kept anything in his house, all he had was a quantity of counterfeit money, which they had stored in plastic containers and buried in a forest. Arthur was arrested anyway, thanks to his stepmother Anise's testimony. In the end, after the trial, his father received a 5-year prison sentence, while Arthur received 3. So, you might wonder how he got a lighter sentence than his father, even though the mastermind was the reason his father was caught in the middle of the operation, and he was the one directing it when they arrested him. Arthur was convicted because of the testimony of his stepmother, a niece, who was, of course, released. The neighbors were also released because they cooperated and confessed. Arthur entered prison in 2002 and served 2.5 years. This period was one of the hardest in his life. First, he was separated from his son, and second, he separated from his wife, Natalie, who decided to leave him. She was finally able to endure the time he spent in prison, which made her reflect on her life and the circumstances that led her to where she was. He vowed to himself that he would leave the world of crime forever this time. He was just waiting for the day he would be released from prison to start a new life. But on the day he was released, something happened that he never expected. Music, from the forests. He didn't want to use that money again, he was afraid of ruining his life again. But sometimes, when his son or his son's mother needed more support, he was forced to resort to it and use it. He was trying to improve his relationship with her. He wanted to be close to his son and make up for the years of separation. He was actually succeeding in this, and his relationship with his son improved significantly. But in 2005, a well-known magazine published an article and a lengthy story about Arthur, calling him the greatest counterfeiter in the world. The article stated that Arthur had counterfeited more than $10 million. His son was reading the article, surprised and unable to believe it. He kept saying to his father, "It's impossible. You couldn't have counterfeited more than 10 million. Arthur replied, "Yes, my son. I mean, most likely, over all these years, I've reached that number and even more." His son couldn't believe it, he couldn't comprehend the extent of his father's involvement in this field. So affected by the article and its details, he decided to print it out on their home computer, using a regular printer and ordinary paper. To be honest, when I was young, I was foolish too, and I tried it, but it was out of curiosity. My intention wasn't to counterfeit. Listen to me, the police, anyone who has tried it or is going to try it knows that the action would never yield results comparable to money, not even remotely. So, when Arthur III saw what her son was doing, she immediately called him and said, "Come quickly, Arthur. Your son is trying to print money from the house computer." Arthur felt guilty and even ashamed because he had made the Rolling Stone look good, even though what he was doing was a crime. He didn't consider for a moment that this comment would encourage his son to follow in his footsteps. So, Arthur immediately went home and entered his son's room, finding his beloved son printing $20 bills from a regular printer, their house printer. At that time, the son was going through a difficult period, he was using some types of drugs like Xanax, and his mental state wasn't good. So, imagine, his father suddenly walked in and started yelling at him, asking, "Why are you doing this?" And he replied, "It's my business. I'll do what I want. It's permissible for you but forbidden for me. Don't compare me to you. You don't need money. I'm the one who takes care of you and provides for you. You don't need to do this." The father and son got into a fight, their voices rising. The boy, apparently under the influence of drugs, grabbed a stack of counterfeit money he'd been printing and ran out of the house. His father immediately chased after him. Once they were out in the street, they resumed their fight, shouting at each other in front of everyone. In a fit of rage, the son grabbed the stack of printed money he was holding and threw it at his father. Unfortunately, a police car was parked right next to them, with officers watching what was happening. Arthur thought to his son, "Oh no, we're in trouble," and immediately got down on the ground, trying to gather the money. The officer said, "Arthur, everything's fine, officer. This is my son. We had a minor disagreement, but it's nothing serious. I'll sort it out." But the officer didn't leave. He asked Arthur his name, and Arthur gave it. The officer filed a report, and that was that. Arthur knew the matter was over. The police arrived with the FBI and immediately closed off the entire street. Arthur was arrested and made to sit on the sidewalk with his hands cuffed behind his back. After collecting all the money and evidence, they took Arthur to the FBI office. There, a senior officer said, "Arthur, we know that $20 wasn't his business, but this $100 bill we found in your wallet looks familiar." This was one of the counterfeit bills Arthur was still using when he needed something. And that was that. Arthur's case was closed. The first time he went to prison, he got 3 years because they didn't catch him with counterfeit money. This time, he was caught on the same charge, and the evidence was conclusive. In the end, he was given a 9-year prison sentence, a long and difficult term. As for Arthur's third son, the troublemaker, he was a minor, only 15 years old, so they sent him to juvenile detention for a few months before releasing him. They tried to get him to testify against his father, but he refused. When Arthur went back to prison, he felt utterly hopeless about his son's life. He moved back in with his mother for a short time, then lived alone. For the next few years, he spent all his time counterfeiting money. The counterfeit bills he made weren't very professional, they were literally just scan images. Despite this, he had many customers and was always working on large orders. Over time, he improved his skills and acquired better tools and equipment. The son wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, so he set up his own workshop, bought printers and more advanced equipment, and started printing bigger and bigger orders. He would keep the printers running all night. But one day in 2009, when he was 18, he was working on one of the large orders, printing, when suddenly a large number of FBI agents stormed the place. Arthur III was standing at the workshop door when the police stormed in, and his first instinctive reaction was, he locked the workshop door, the place where the printers, equipment, and other things were, as if, once he locked it, no one would open it and see what was inside. Honestly, I'm such an idiot. Anyway, they arrested him, opened the workshop door, and found a printer still printing. He was literally caught red-handed. His father, who was in prison, was shocked and felt his heart break when he heard the news. His son was in prison for forgery, and of course, he was the main reason for it. If he hadn't been a forger, his son certainly wouldn't have been in prison. Arthur submitted a request to be transferred to the same prison as his son, and about a month later, the request was granted. Arthur was excited to finally see his son after all these years, even though they were both behind bars. During the following years, Arthur and his son became friends and spent most of their time together, making up for lost time. They talked about the future, their ambitions, and what they would do when they got out of prison. For Arthur, his dream became to become an artist, and he drew even while in prison. And indeed, when he was released from prison in 2015, he started working in the art field. Most of his works were a reflection of his life and his forgery career. He exploited the security features of the counterfeit money and incorporated those same features into his art. He added watermarks, used color-changing ink, and found a way to adapt the forgery techniques he used to create his art. Arthur's works started selling for prices reaching $40,000 and $50,000. My life changed 180 degrees. Instead of counterfeiting $100 bills, he started creating a single piece as valuable as a dollar bill and selling it for tens of thousands. It's amazing how successful someone can be if they know how to direct their skills, art, and abilities in the right direction. And that was the end of Arthur's story. But before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell icon.